So here is the portion of the information for Chapter 6 that you'll need to be focusing on for quiz number 1. And a reminder, this is social and emotional development in infants and toddlers. So now we're going to focus on social understanding and emotions. The social brain are areas dedicated to processing social information. Social coordination in infant and toddlerhood, it focuses on imitation and focusing on studying and reacting to adult facial expressions. And so just like as we mentioned in Chapter 5 when we talked about language, you're going to see some real similarities in what your textbook calls the social brain. In regards, it's very much related to the part of the brain which is utilized for language. And just like we mentioned before, there's the auditory cortex, which focuses on the sounds they hear, the visual cortex, the facial response, and we're looking at the right-hand side of the diagram or figure. And then the amygdala starting at the bottom right, and then the prefrontal cortex where problem solving happens and decision making happens. So infants show 3 emotional states: contentment, interest, and distress. And according to some developmentalists, the social smile truly happens between 6 to 8 weeks of age. Not everybody agrees. Many feel like it happens earlier, including myself. One of the way researchers look at social and emotional development is using something called a still face procedure, where an adult caregiver would have no reaction to what the infant is doing, and then the researcher will watch how the infant reacts. So the caregiver stops responding to the infant, and remember we said there are particular genetic expectations not only for the adults related to the infant, but also the infant related to the caregivers. The infant attempts to re-engage the caregiver, and if those efforts don't work, they look away, they become more physically active, and eventually they'll start to cry, because that's not an expected response. Between 4 and 6 months, infants develop 4 distinct emotional display patterns. The social interaction pattern or engagement pattern, the object engagement pattern, the passive withdrawal pattern, where they may be overwhelmed and so will pull away, and the active protest pattern. And so here you have a chart that shows you different facial expressions from joy to anger in infants. So before 9 months, infants can understand their own goals and the goals of others. Between 9 and 12 months, they can coordinate their goals with the goals of others. And so that's a developmental milestone. During the 2nd year, children become aware that they exist as separate individuals. And one of the ways that researchers discovered that was with the Rouge test of self-awareness, where the infant who is self-aware, if they have something on their face when they look in the mirror, they're going to try to wipe it off. If they're not self-aware, then they're not going to recognize that the rouge is on their face. Self-conscious emotions develop at around 18 months, and these are empathy, and this involves a sign of concern for others' feelings, shame, shame happens when they do something they know that caregivers are not going to be happy with, embarrassment, pride, and guilt. During the second year, toddlers develop emotional regulation at their own developmental level. The strategies that they use to help themselves regulate their emotions is they're able to communicate how they feel to an adult. They look away from something that scares them. They seek comfort from a favorite object. So this is a time where they might have a blanket or a stuffed animal that helps them feel better. And they can begin to use language when they're scared. So now let's look at socialization. This is the practice of communicating the rules of the family and society, and this begins during the second year. So when we look at securely attached infants, they're going to have more positive outcomes in regards to socialization. They're more likely to comply with adult requests, and they can communicate with adults in achieving mutual goals. Whereas insecurely attached infants will have more of a struggle with socialization. Ways to help increase compliance is to communicate what you want verbally in a positive way. So rather than saying don't run, say walk, and that tells them exactly what you want them to do. If you say don't run only, then they don't know what you want them to do, what is expected. Allow the child some choice. So you can give them a choice between two things, and they may say a third thing, but just direct them back to the two choices. And then follow consistent routines, because routines are important to children probably up to the age of 8 when they enter elementary school, and concrete operations, Piaget's concrete operation. So play is really important all throughout life, but particularly for infants, toddlers, and early childhood. Parton is a researcher that studied play, and she came up with 4 forms of play. The first form of play is solitary play. That's something that happens in infants and toddlers as they're exploring the world around them and playing by themselves. Even though this is a developmental stage, individuals continue to participate in play in a solitary way throughout life. Parallel play is when children are playing next to each other, and they may even be using same materials, but they're not interacting. Associative play is the third form, or simple social play. Here, in this picture, the children may exchange paintbrushes or share colors, and that's associative play. Whereas with parallel play, they just be painting next to each other. And cooperative pretend play, or pretending maybe to paint a mural to go up on a wall together, that is the most sophisticated form of play. So let's take a look at a special need related to social and emotional development that starts to show up in toddlerhood, and that's autism. Autism spectrum disorder is called that because it can have a mild effect, such as Asperger's, or a really profound effect where the child has cognitive involvement and also would achieve no language. Autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder that begins prior to age 3 and involves atypical communication, restricted interest, and repetitive behaviors. And the precise cause is unknown, and there may be various causes depending on the individual. So possible factors, basically now we realize that there is a strong genetic factor involved with autism. It runs in families, but also other factors may be exposure to toxins and environmental pollutants prenatally, abnormalities in social brain development. But something we do know that is generally not a factor is vaccines. And one of the reasons why in the past we thought that vaccines might be a cause is because autism starts to show up at the time when we start giving vaccines. So that was more of a correlational factor, which means that the vaccines increased along when autism showed up and the effects of autism showed up. So they changed together, but they weren't related. So early signs of autism could be limited eye gaze, so not looking others in the eye or understanding the importance of that, lack of responsiveness to their name, repetitive behaviors, repetitive behaviors in other words, doing something over and over, especially when they're stressed, and decreased use of gestures. And so they're not participating in that body language and gestures, like putting their hands out to be picked up as other children would. Early interventions that show promise are applied behavioral analysis, or ABA, where they look at behaviors that are causing issues and then figure out what might be happening to cause that issue. And some target focuses would be promoting skills to participate in joint attention, imitation, and then pretend play. And that needs a lot of structural problem solving and intervention to promote.